I want to invite you to Daniel 1. Wow, we're loud this morning, aren't we? Daniel chapter 1, please, if you'll open there. And I have a particular purpose in mind in addressing, in looking at this text this morning. I'm thinking in particular about our young folks, and in particular about some of our young folks that are either have just left home to kind of begin life on their own, and at least one who's getting ready to. So Will, this lesson's for you this morning. And for you, Annette, and Kendall, and Cammie, Tiffany, you fall into this age group as well. Lindsay, in some ways you do. And we have some that are near to that age of being out on your own. But I don't want the rest of us to kind of miss the life lessons that are a part of the text that we're going to look at this morning. Daniel, whose story that we're going to see here in Daniel chapter 1, is really in the age group even younger than Will and Annette and Kendall and Cammie and Tiffany and Lindsay. And he's probably in his mid, perhaps even his early teens at the time that this story is recorded for us. But I don't want us to miss, if we're later in life, the life lessons that Daniel learned about faith that really are life lessons about faith. Because there are a lot of our folks, in fact, I would say all of us, are going to find ourselves in the kind of transitions, maybe not as dramatically, but in transitions that are similar to the transition that Daniel found himself in, with reference to how it impacts faith and the kind of perspective that we need in those kinds of turns. In fact, if the title I would give what we're going to talk about this morning is this. It's really an admonition. Trust God's hand in the inevitable turns of life. And I want to just say that your faith, if I could preach a little bit on just the title, your faith is foundational to how your life will go. And the security that you're going to need, Will, the security that you're going to need, Annette and Kendall and Cammie and Tiffany and Lindsay and all of you, the confidence or the security that we need to find is a security in God's hand, that He's in control, that He is in charge. And the circumstance that's going to make that needful for us is that there will inevitably be unexpected turns in our life. All of us will have things that happen in our life that are world-changing, that are surprising, some that are difficult, but there will inevitably be turns in life. And what we need most in those situations is trust in the hand of God. 3 times in Daniel chapter 1, we're told that how God was involved in things as they were unfolding. Let me quickly kind of tell you the story that's recorded for us in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel was a young man growing up apparently in the city of Jerusalem. It must have been the case that his parents were of some noble birth, because the people that found themselves, the youths that found themselves in his circumstance, were all young men, young people that were in some way of noble blood in the city. And so his father must have been somebody in the city of Jerusalem. Because what happened was, God allowed Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, to come in and to invade their city. Now I want you to think about that. We live in a land where we feel free and where we feel secure. And what God allowed happened to the Jewish people, who were the people that He protected, the people that He chose, the people that He liberated, the people to whom He gave freedom and laws and government, the people who were His covenant people. Because they didn't behave, because they didn't trust Him, because they didn't follow Him, God let somebody come in and take over their land. And so Nebuchadnezzar was the one. And so Nebuchadnezzar came in and he invaded their country. And he came to their greatest city, Jerusalem. And he was able to come through the walls. Now, he didn't destroy them at first. The story that we read about in Daniel chapter 1 happened in about 605 BC, just as Nebuchadnezzar had come to the height of his power. And what he did first was he came in and he set in place another king. And he took away all of their stellar people. And that was a common practice in that land. You take away the most gifted people, and hopefully what that does is kind of keep a nation under your thumb. And so that's what he did. He took away their gifted people, took them back with him to Babylon. He would come another 8 years later, and this time with even more ferocity, and he would completely depose their king. And would do more destruction. And then 18 years after the events that we read of here in Daniel 1, he'd come again in 587 BC, and this time he would completely destroy the city. And so people would be slaughtered, the city would be burnt, the walls would be destroyed, and the city would be completely undone. So that's what's on the horizon. In the next 18 years in Daniel's life, his world is going to be completely undone. Now, Daniel was in the first group of people that were taken away captive. And as I said a moment ago, what Nebuchadnezzar did when he came into the land is he set up a puppet king, and he took away their best and their brightest. And so he took their children, the children of the noble people, and he took them captives back to Babylon. And what he did with them that were, if they were good looking, if they were healthy, if they were smart, he actually started a program of education for them. And so they would learn the language and the culture of the Babylonians. Because you see, that's part of how he intended to make his government stronger, is he would take bright people, gifted people, artisans, people that were smart who could be wise and counselors from other nations, and he would make them servants of his government. And so that's part of how he strengthened his own cabinetry, was by putting in place gifted people from other places. And so that's what he was going to do with some of these youths that came from Jerusalem. And so he started them on a program of education. He also allowed them to eat the very best things, the things that would come from his own table. And you could see how part of that was to get them used to the culture of the Babylonians, but also to befriend them. And so the things that Nebuchadnezzar ate were the things that these kids were allowed to eat. And so they could eat the very best meat, the very best desserts, whatever the chef was fixing for Nebuchadnezzar, they were fixing for these young people. And they would get the very best education in the land. This would happen for some 3 years. And after they had gone through this period of 3 years of education, then those that were the cream of the crop would then be the servants in Nebuchadnezzar's own court. And so there were 4 young men that we read about here in Daniel chapter 1 who found themselves in that predicament. 4 among, I would expect, other youths that found themselves in this situation. But these 4 apparently were friends. And so we read about Daniel, and we read about 3 other youths that we know better by the names that were given them in captivity: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the thing that they found themselves in with this kind of education or training that Nebuchadnezzar had in mind was that it was going to require, if they were going to follow this program of education, some moral compromise on their part. Because some of the things that the king ate were not things that they could eat because of their own Jewish allegiance to the law. And so they were troubled about the things that they were supposed to eat while they were in training. And so they decided that they weren't going to do it. They made up their mind. And Daniel, we're told about, is kind of being the leader here. So I don't know if he talked the other 3 friends into it, or if they came to him and they all talked together. But we're told specifically about Daniel that he made up his mind that he wasn't going to eat the stuff the king ate. And so he asked permission of the fellow that was in charge of all of these young people if he could get a pass from that, if he could not have to eat that food. And the fellow that was in charge said, if you all don't eat this food and if you start looking unhealthy, If your face is haggard and if you're not growing and strong, then it's going to be my head. I'm going to be the one that gets in trouble for that. And so instead of going to the fellow that was in charge, Daniel had a plan B. And this guy liked him. We're told that God gave him favor and compassion with the guy that was in charge. But he wouldn't go along with it. And so he asked the fellow that was in particular supervision of him and his 3 friends, he said, would you just do something for me for 10 days? Instead of letting us eat all of this stuff that the other kids are eating, and I would expect that among the kids that were eating this stuff, there were probably some Jewish kids that were fine with it, or had some conviction about it, but went along with it anyway. But these 4 were not going to do that. Daniel said, I wonder if you'd test us for 10 days. Let us just eat vegetables and water. So just, Brussels sprouts and water. Whatever vegetable you don't like to eat, spinach and water, salad and water. For 10 days, let us eat just vegetables and water and just see how we look when it's all over with. And so when the 10 days were up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were compared to the other kids, and they looked healthier. They seemed to be in better shape. Their faces, their countenance looked brighter. And so what that meant was it worked for 10 days, and so that's what they ate for the next 3 years. They ate vegetables and water because because they responded so well to that. And at the end of the 3 years, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, when they were examined by the officials, and when they were interviewed by Nebuchadnezzar, they were found to be the best and the brightest, and so they entered into the service of Nebuchadnezzar, the king. Now, I want you to notice some of the statements that are made explicitly in this chapter about God's involvement in the things that were happening with these boys. So notice, if you would, the first statement that's made in verse 2. It says, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. The hand there is Nebuchadnezzar's hand. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Now, I just want you to notice there that God's hand was explicitly in these things that it says happened. We're going to talk about that more in just a moment, but that's the first thing. Now, if you would, go to verse 9 of the text, where it says, now God granted, notice he's the actor again, God's the subject again, God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? And so God gave him favor and compassion with this man, but the man was still afraid of what would happen with him and the king. But I just want you to see God's hand is in that too. Then the third situation in which we read God's hand was involved is in verse 17, where it says, and as for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. And so days which it's specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered into the current king's personal service. So those are 3 situations in which we're told God's hand was involved. Now, I want to look at those 3 occasions a bit more carefully this morning and return to the theme from which we started, that we need to trust God's hand in all of the inevitable turns of life. And I want to suggest to you that we read of 3 turns here in this text. And let's talk first of all about the first one that's identified for us. One of the inevitable turns that's going to happen in life is that there are going to be inevitable upsets. There are going to be inevitable upsets. What I mean by that is that there are going to be times in our life when our world comes undone, when it comes unraveled. When things that we thought were secure, when things that we thought were certain, when things that we thought were kind of impregnable, when things that we kind of counted on to sort of be there and be in place, when all of a sudden those things just kind of come apart at the seams and just kind of disappear. I wish, Will, that I could tell you that you would never have anything hard happen in your life. I wish I could promise you, Kendall, that there would never be a time when someone that you trusted disappointed you. Or Annette, that there would never be something about your world, either your work or your country or the value system of people around you. I wish I could promise you that you'd never be challenged in some way. Or I wish I could promise you, Cammie, that there would never be something in your world that would not, that the things that you really counted on wouldn't be shaken. But I can't promise you that. In fact, the thing that I have to promise all of us is that not only might that happen, it will happen. It will happen. It'll happen to all of us. And so Daniel is living with the Lord's people. He is in the Lord's city in Jerusalem. He's in the place where the Lord's temple is. And the most sacred things in that city are violated. Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he marches right into the temple. And he takes away all the treasuries there. And he goes back gloating as if this showed that he was more powerful and his gods were more powerful than Jehovah. And he takes them, all these trinkets, and he puts them in the house of his God, as if his God had been victorious. And Daniel and others watch this happen. Now, we know, the story tells us, that God was the one letting this happen. He was letting His world be shattered. He was letting these things occur. And it wasn't because of Nebuchadnezzar's God, it was because of Daniel's God that things were playing out the way that they did. But it's going to happen. There are going to be things in our life where it could be our government is toppled. It could be that laws are changed in some way that are not friendly to our faith. It could be that there are job losses. It could be that our health is impacted. It could be that there are people that we trust that betray us. Those things are going to occur, and those things happened in Daniel's world. He's 16. I don't know how old he is, but he's got to be young, because there's going to be 18 years, and then there's going to be 70 years in captivity, and he lived to see the next king that came to power, and so he's got to be mighty young for the story to make any sense. And so here he is, 16 or younger, and all of a sudden he's an orphan. His mom's not fixing him breakfast anymore. And he doesn't see his dad when his dad comes home from work. And all the friends that he used to play games with on the streets in Jerusalem, or they used to go hunting in the woods, they're not around anymore. Or they're in the same fix that he is. And all of a sudden he's surrounded by people that don't speak his language. They're all talking a different language. And there's a government that he doesn't agree with. And a government that doesn't worship the God that he does. Where is God in all of this? And by the time that he's in his 30s, this government that he is now being forced to serve is going to go in, and it is going to pillage the city that he grew up in. That city won't exist anymore. Those homes won't be there. The temple won't be there. It'll all be gone. It'll all be decimated. And what Daniel's got to learn in the midst of all of this unpredictability in life is that God's hand is in this. And that somehow out of all this hardship, God is going to bring something good, better. Out of all this, God is going to grow me. And all this, God is not going to abandon me. Out of all of this, God has some kind of purpose in mind. And I may not see the purpose, but I trust that God is going to be there. He will be there. He is there, even in what's happening right now. And what we're told explicitly in verse 2 is that God was the one who chose that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom would be the big kingdom on the block, and that for a little while Jerusalem was going to go away, and Daniel was going to go away into captivity. And he had to learn to accept that and to trust that God was in that. Now, I don't know how when inevitable turns, when inevitable upsets happen in your life, I don't know what kind of path that's going to take. I don't know what kind of hurt is going to be a part of that. I don't know what kind of uncertainty is going to be a part of that. But I can guarantee that there will be some things like that in your life. But God knows what those turns will be, and He knows what the end will be. And if you trust Him in that, He will be with you, and He will keep you, and He will protect you, and He will bless you in that. But we have to trust that the blessings too are not just things like comfort and riches and easiness. Some of the blessings might be the things that He's doing to your character in the midst of all of those things that are testing you. But there will be inevitable upsets, and the best thing you can do, you can't trust a government, you can't trust the people that are always in charge, you can't trust your own health, you can't trust your own finances. The only one you can trust is God. And you need to put your absolute trust in Him that He'll make it all okay. Secondly, there's not only going to be inevitable upsets in life, but there's also going to be inevitable foes. There's also going to be inevitable foes. And what I mean by that is that you're going to need to trust God when you find your values in conflict with your environment. When you find your values in conflict with your environment. Daniel found that. He's blessed in some way because he survived, and he's going to be protected from the further downfall that's going to happen in Jerusalem. But he's now brought into the king's court, and he's put in a compromising situation because he's invited to eat all these things that for him have been taboo. But notice this. His mom ain't there anymore to say, you can't eat that, Daniel. His daddy ain't around to say, Daniel, you can't have that. Daniel can eat this, and guess what? He ain't going to get in trouble. His mom's not going to scold him. His dad's not going to scold him. There's no pressure. There's no priesthood anymore. There's nobody to get on his case about doing something that he's been taught not to do. And so he can get away with it. And so Daniel, as a teen, finds himself in a situation where not only are there no guardians who are going to prevent him from doing this, but in fact, all of the guardians that are now in his life are encouraging the thing that he can't do. The people that are in charge now are saying, Daniel, eat, drink. It's okay. And the things that are okay to eat and drink are things that I expect look mighty good. I mean, this is, the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar eats would be the stuff that a lot of folks would like to eat. They'd like to have this kind of stuff at their table, this kind of drink in their cup. And Daniel is able to eat and drink the best of the land. And that's going to happen with you. I mean, you're going to find yourself in situations where you have a value system and you're in a workplace, or you're on a ball team, or you're in a college dorm, or you are in some kind of association, or you're at a friend's house, and the commander in your situation, like in Daniel's situation, the one that he went to talk with them about his moral problem here, it might be a friend, it might be a leader among your peers, but it might be a principal, it might be a teacher, it might be a coach, it might be your boss, it might be somebody in charge. And so Daniel goes to them and he talks to them about his situation. There are three things about Daniel's behavior here when he finds himself in an environment where his values are challenged, are in conflict. There are three things that he does that are very impressive to me. The first thing he does is he makes up. Then he speaks up. And then the third thing that he does is that he gives up. And I want to talk about those three things. The first thing he does is he makes up his mind. I want you to see the way that that's stated in the text, verse 8. Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. I just want you to see that this was Daniel's choice. He made up his mind that he would not. Sometimes when I was young and I was put in a situation where my values were tested or compromised, I want you to notice the difference in this statement. Sometimes I would say, I can't do that. And when I gave the justification for that, it was because my mom said I can't. I can't do it. But I want you to notice the difference between saying I can't do it and I won't do it. Do you see the difference? I mean, when I will not, it is an act of my will. It's a decision that I've made. When I can't, usually there's some kind of external authority that's preventing me from doing that. And I just want you to see that when Daniel makes up his mind, it says that he made up his mind that he would not. That's past tense for will not. He would not defile himself with the king's food. He made his own decision here. Mom is not making it for him. Dad is not making it for him. It's his decision. He owns it. He's made up his mind. Now, the thing that you open yourself up to, that I opened myself up to when I said I can't do it because my mom said I can't, is, well, do you always do what your mom says you can't do? Your mom's not here. I mean, you put yourself in the situation where the only reason you do things is because of who's watching you, or who's there, or who's in charge, rather than it being a result of your own conviction. I'm doing this because it's right, or I'm not doing this because it's wrong. And Daniel, when he makes up his mind, he's owned the decision. It's his decision. He's not going to do this because he's settled in his own mind that it's wrong. And so if I'm going to find myself, and I will find myself, in situations where my value system is going to be tested, first thing I've got to do is make up my mind. The second thing I've got to do is I've got to speak my mind. I've got to speak up. And Daniel speaks up. Now I want you to notice that Daniel had to speak up twice. I mean, he had plan A in mind. Plan A didn't work, so he had to move to plan B. And I expect that if plan B didn't work, that Daniel probably had a plan C as well. But plan A was, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to the man in charge and I'm going to explain to him the situation. And so look at what it says in the end of verse 8. It says, he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. And so he went and he asked permission that he not do something that would compromise his values. And notice that the person he sought permission from was someone that was easy apparently for him to talk to. Because look at what it says in verse 9. God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, even though he respected him, even though Daniel had compassion and favor with him, he still said no. He said no. He said, I am afraid of my Lord the king. And so, you have to answer to me, but I have somebody that I have to answer to, and it's not going to be my head for you. I like you, Daniel, but I'm not going to give up my life for you. And so he says no. He said, what if he should see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are also your age? Then would you make me forfeit my head to the king? And so look at verse 11. Daniel goes and he talks to someone else. Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials that he just talked to, he talked to the overseer that the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he said, please test your servants for 10 days. And so he goes to him and talks to him. Now I want you to see something that's really important about when you speak up your faith. You need to learn to explain your reasons for who you are and for what you believe. And to do it in a way that still shows respect and still shows consideration for the person that you're explaining it to. One of the things I respect about Daniel here is not just that he said, I can't do this, but that apparently he did it in a way that he didn't lose any respect with someone who had an opposing position. The commissioner didn't believe the way he did. And the one who was in charge of him didn't believe the way he did. But Daniel, he asked permission, which says to me that he was respectable in the way that he addressed the situation. And he had favor and compassion, even when the guy tells him no. And so he goes then to the one who's directly, the supervisor directly in charge of him, and he makes a deal with him. He makes an offer here about how we can kind of test the situation and see how it works out. But the thing that I love about what Daniel does is he shows respect. He doesn't go in with an attitude and talk about how, the commissioner and how his supervisor, how they've put him in a pickle. He doesn't do that. He's respectful in the way that he does that. And I need to learn to articulate my faith in that same kind of way. It may be that when I explain it even the best way that I can, that the answer is still no. And that I lose the job, or that I lose the position, or that I lose favor. But I can still explain in a way that shows consideration, that shows respect. In fact, I need to, if they're ever going to see God's side of things. And so Daniel understands that they've grown up in a very different world, in a very different land. They're ignorant of Jehovah. And so Daniel tries to explain it to them. He speaks up, and he does so in a way that's respectful and considerate. The third thing that I want you to see that's impressive about Daniel in facing inevitable foes is how Daniel gives up. I really respect the fact that he puts the burden on himself and not on the people in charge. He listens to what the commissioner says when he says, if this goes bad, it's going to be my head. And so Daniel says to the one in charge of him, let's test this for 10 days. I'm just going to eat vegetables and water. Just bring us that, and let's see how we look when it's all over with. And if we look good, then let us eat vegetables and water for 3 years. Now, here's the give up part in that. Daniel can eat meat. That ain't the problem. And Daniel can drink more than water. That isn't the problem. There's lots of things that are probably on the king's table that Daniel can eat, and there are probably lots of things that he can drink. But Daniel is making it easier on everyone else and making it hard on himself, because this is a chance for him to show how much his own personal faith means to him. He'll give up for God, but he's not going to put the burden on them. And so he's going to make it easy for them. Just bring me salad and bring me water, and let's see how this plays out after 10 days. He doesn't say, bring me a menu and let me tell you the things that I want you to bring to me. He doesn't say, let me look at it and, okay, I can eat this meat and I can, but we need to, if we'll prepare this a little differently, then it'll be okay for me. Or if you'll fix my drink just this way, that's the way I like it, and he doesn't do that. The burden is not on them, the burden is on himself. And I wish we as believers could learn how to do that when we explain our faith. Sometimes when we talk about our faith, we make people feel like they're the bad guys in this. Or we make it as if somehow we need to be catered to because of our devotion to God. Daniel doesn't explain his faith that way. He's willing to give up if necessary. And think about how his faith looks when that's over with. There are things that he has a right to, but he gives up the things that he has a right to, in order that the value that he has on God can shine through in that. And so his supervisor and the commissioner have to be impressed that here's a young man who for 3 years is going to eat just vegetables and drink water because his God matters that much to him. And it doesn't make an imposition on anyone else, doesn't inconvenience anyone else. In fact, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to prepare vegetables than it is to prepare all these dainties that are on the king's table. And Daniel's willing to take that because he understands that this is a way to face his foes. And if we could learn that too, then we would find God's hand in that. The third thing that I want to say to you is that not only will we find inevitable upsets and inevitable foes, but we're also going to find inevitable ruts in life. Inevitable ruts in life. And when I speak of ruts, this is what I'm saying. You're going to find yourself in situations where you feel stuck, where you're stuck doing things, learning things that don't make sense right now. You might say, well, that's education, right? A lot of times we feel that way as kids, that we're stuck doing things and learning things that sure don't make sense right now. And I want you to see that Daniel was stuck doing things, learning things, more than just the education he was involved in, doing things, learning things that just didn't make any sense right now. Why would God want him to be in Babylon? What's the answer to that? Why would God want him to learn the language of the Chaldeans? Why would God want him to serve in the court of the king who does bad things to people? Who's going to do bad things to his people? I don't know if Daniel's parents lived. I don't know whether they were executed. I don't know if they died in battle. I don't know if they were carried away captive. But here's a king that's going to do bad things to people that Daniel loves and cares about. And he is working for him. Does that make sense? There had to be times where it didn't make sense to Daniel. Why am I stuck doing things, learning things? Why am I learning about the Babylonian deities? Why am I learning about the Babylonian history? Why am I learning about their music and about their culture and about their fine things and about their political system? What am I doing here? Must not have made sense to Daniel sometimes. But I want you to see that God's hand was in that. It says in verse 17, as for these 4 youths, God blessed their education. God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature. What kind of literature is he reading? Babylonian literature. In every kind of literature and wisdom, and Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. And so God was involved in the things that Daniel was learning and the things that Daniel was doing. I want to say to you, to all of our young folks, and all of our old folks too, you're going to find yourself in a rut sometimes. Why am I here? What does God intend for me to learn in this rut? Why do I feel like I'm spinning my wheels and not going someplace? What am I to learn here? Well, there is something. And that something may not be apparent. But when we trust God in the rut, when we trust God in the uncomfortable station, in the uncomfortable position, then there will be things that we will learn in that. There will be things skills that we will gain in that will all put us in a position for service. And that's what happens to Daniel. There were ways that he served God, that he served his people, that he served us in that uncomfortable predicament. The greatest visions of what God would eventually do with his kingdom were shown to Daniel and came from his pen. Much of what we studied, when we studied the book of Revelation, a lot of the language that's in that book was language that was first formed in the head and in the mouth and at the pen of Daniel, because they were things that God was telling him about what he would someday do. God gave him a picture of what he would do until the end of time. It was spectacular. And a lot of that came because God had prepared him in an uncomfortable place, in an uncomfortable position, to learn things and to see things and to do things that apparently Babylon was the best place for that to happen. And so God put Daniel there so that that could happen. And could I say to you that God is doing that same thing with each one of us? No one's left out in that. There's a place and there's a purpose that God has for you in life. And there's an education that's going on with that. And there's a learning of skill and of knowledge that is happening with that. If we'll trust His hand in that, then God will, in those inevitable ruts, He will prepare us for something more. 16 is a mighty young age to start learning these lessons. But I tell you, it's a good time to start learning when you're young that there are going to be inevitable upsets, that there are going to be inevitable foes, that there are going to be inevitable ruts, and that if we'll trust God in the midst of all of those crossroads and changes in life, that God will be with us and will bless us in that. And we have good book for that, because 3 times we're told that that's exactly what God was doing. He was in the change. He was in the rut. He was in the situation with the foes. And He was making something better of it. God will do that with you, Will. God will do that with you, Annette, and with you, Kendall, with you, Cammie. He'll do that with you, Lindsay. He'll do it with you, Tiffany. He'll do it with all of our young folks, and He'll do it with all of our old folks too. And all of us that are somewhere between our young folks and our old folks. He'll do it. Because He's a great God, a mighty God. If you're not serving Him, why don't you change that today? If you're not following Him, if you've not given Him your life yet, then the only secure place that you can put your life is in His hands. So why not do that today? Won't you make that start as together we stand as we sing?